I'm going to go ahead and continue my commentary on this book right here. Now we're going to talk about temples and kings. Okay? Now, as we all know, in the Jerusalem temple system, the way it worked was that God would give a divine message to a priest and say, "This is the king I want you to put up into power." Then that priest would find that king, anoint him, and say, "You are going to be our next king." And from that moment forward, that was it. Now we know that in pagan societies, kings were usually put into power because of a war. Okay? However, after the war was over with and the king was finally put into power, what would happen is that pagan priests would then anoint the king to say, "Hey, this is the will of the gods." Yeah, they do that too. Just to reinforce the idea that this king was going to be around forever. Of course, we all know that God doesn't see things that way. So, basically, what the message was, whether you're talking about Jerusalem kings or you're talking about kings in pagan societies, you're talking about if you were in direct opposition to the king, basically you were in direct opposition to a god. And that can spell a lot of trouble for you. Okay? And that's why we have the thing with Saul and David didn't kill Saul even though Saul was chasing him all over the place, because if David had killed Saul, he would have lost his place as king of Israel, and he knew that. And he did not want to offend God, despite the fact that Saul had offended him. So, therefore, David didn't kill Saul. He left that up to God. And God took care of it himself. So, whether you were living in Jerusalem or in a pagan society, you didn't oppose the king, because that would be just like opposing God himself. Or in their case, pagan gods. See what I mean? So it was a means of control. And where did you find your God? Or in the pagans' way, where did you find your gods? You went to the temple. That's where you found them. Alright. So you see how these temples actually worked? Why the king would have such direct association with a temple? That's where he would derive a lot of his powers. As a matter of fact, pagan kings and Jerusalem kings would exempt temples and the priests that serve the temples from nation taxes. Okay? So in other words, the peasants would have to pay taxes to the government, but the priests didn't have to. And that's kind of the way it works in this country. Have you ever noticed that churches here in the United States, that they're recognized as legitimate churches, they don't have to pay taxes to the federal government? That's where all that came from. See what I mean? Of course, nobody worships the President of the United States, although some presidents over the years probably wish they had. But that's beside the point. Nobody worships the President of the United States. But back then, it would have been commonplace, especially in pagan societies. Okay, we're not talking about Jerusalem, because in Jerusalem you didn't worship the king. You worshipped God. Okay? But, and the Jewish kings knew this. No Jewish king would ever expect anybody to worship them. They knew better than to do that, because they were serving a real live God. But in pagan societies, you know, people were to worship Caesar. That was the whole thing. That was what caused all the troubles. Even Nebuchadnezzar expected to be worshipped. Okay, he was the Babylonian king, and he expected people to worship him just as much as they worshipped that statue. And that's what got Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in trouble. Okay? Because they weren't going to worship a king, and they weren't going to worship a statue. They were going to worship the one true God. There you go. So basically the difference in the Jewish society and in the pagan society was that when you had a Jewish king, the Jewish king never expected anybody to worship him. They expected everybody to worship God. Okay? However, in pagan societies, you were to worship the king as though he were a god. That didn't please God very well. Alright, I will tell you more in a future video. Stay tuned.